Good morning, everyone. I'm David Gutterman from Medical College of Wisconsin Cardiovascular Center, and I chair the Publications Committee for APS. Today, we're going to do something a little bit different than we've done in the past. I'm going to start out by giving an overview of publishing focused on trainees and early stage investigators, and I'll go through the processes that lead to up to submission. Let me get my slides going on here. So then, Sue Bodine, the editor-in-chief of Journal of Applied Physiology, is going to talk about what happens next, walking you through the process of revising your grant for resubmission. Next, Gina Yosten, editor-in-chief of AJP Regulatory, Integrative, and Comparative Physiology, is going to make a compelling case for the advantages of making AJP your home base for publishing. Then Kara Keehan, Associate Publisher for Strategic Development, will talk about how APS uses social media to promote your work. She's got some really exciting ideas that'll boost visibility of your papers. Then we'll hear from Chris England, Associate Publisher for Ethics and Development. He will talk about a brand new feature being introduced to our family of journals to address issues of rigor and reproducibility. So here you see the portfolio of AJP journals. We cover the entirety of physiology. The collection contains 3 of the top 10 journals in physiology in the world, including the #1, which is Physiological Reviews. Shown here are the new cover designs that just came out earlier this year, and the actual article page format has also changed as well and been updated. I encourage you to take a look. Here I'm going to talk about some of the new initiatives that we've started in the past year or so. The first one is a Spotlight cover program. Here's where you can take original art from your paper and make it a featured cover figure on the journal online. And this will be advertised through social media as well. In addition, you'll get sent an 18 by 24-inch poster of your cover page. And there's a fee for this. We have some news in rigor and reproducibility, which we'll hear about later from Chris England. There have been a number of articles published related to COVID this past year, and these AJP makes available free as open access articles. Be on the lookout for special calls for papers. Some of them now are actually crossing journals, where multiple journals are participating in the same call for papers. We also live in an environment now where open access is getting much more prevalent. Therefore, marketing approaches need to be changed. And APS has launched a new program called Read, Publish, Join. This is where the institution will pay a negotiated fee for everyone to have access to all the AJP journal content, but also to be able to publish for a discounted rate in any of our journals, and free membership for a certain number of faculty or trainees. So if you're an institution with a large number of people who are members of APS, this might be something that'd be very good for you and for your institution. This bundling effect that we're bundling program where we have instituted now at Iowa State University and are pursuing some deals in the UK and Europe. I want to talk about preparing your work for publication very briefly, the overall process, and then issues to consider before you start to write, and then a few tips to enhance your chances for acceptance. Let's start with a life cycle of a manuscript. The first thing that happens is you complete your research, you prepare a manuscript for submission, and you submit the manuscript, and all the things in blue here happen by the authors. And then it comes to AJP, and it goes usually to an associate editor to get assigned. The associate editor sends it out to reviewers. The reviewers submit their critiques, and the associate editor usually makes the decision with the editor. That decision can be reject, hopefully not, but that does occur a lot. It can be accept right away, which is pretty rare. or it can be the most likely thing. It goes asks for revision for some changes. Then it goes back to the authors to address the concerns. It comes back to be resubmitted centrally, re-reviewed, can be rejected or accepted at that point, or go back through the revision process again. Another option is at the decision initially, if the paper is a strong paper, but just doesn't fit in any of the specific AJP journals for whatever reason, it might be referred to physiological reports where you have an option, the author has an option of having it considered there. And with that option, you have a very high chance of statistical chance of getting published. Let's talk a little bit about authorship. It's one of the most important considerations that you should think about before you start to write the paper, before you even do the study. The first and senior authors really should be decided ahead of time. And the middle authors, maybe not so critical, but the order of the authors should all be decided. I suggest you, once you have this figured out at the beginning, you write a little email writing down what you decided and send it to everybody so everyone's on the same page and has the same memory when it comes to writing the paper. Authors must meet 3 criteria, and this is pretty generalized to most institutions and journals. They have to generate at least some of the intellectual content, conception or design of the work, or data interpretation, or analysis. They have to participate in the draft or critically review and revise the intellectual content. And everyone who's an author has to sign off on the final version. Now, let's say another consideration is where to send your journal to. And people often say, well, let's just start with the highest impact factor journal we can. And that's impact factor is only one piece of the puzzle. It's also important to think about the fit for the journal. Even though in this day and age in Medline, with PubMed, you can search any journal for any topic. You really want to pick a journal that fits with your topic and look at the editorial board and make sure it contains people you know who can review your work appropriately. So tips for success, read the instructions to authors. APS is pretty obvious, but APS participates in Flex Submit. So if you sent your paper to Nature and it didn't quite make it, you don't have to reformat it if you want to send it to AJP. You send it in the format that it's in as long as it contains everything, and we'll start to review it that way. If it looks like it's going to be revised and accepted, has a good chance for acceptance, then we'll ask you to change the format at that point. Try to avoid careless mistakes that irritates reviewers, like spelling mistakes or grammar mistakes. Make sure your references are accurate and appropriate. That's also frustrating if they're not. Suggest potential reviewers. You know who can give you a fair assessment of your work, probably as well or as much as the associate editor. So make some suggestions for reviewers. They may not use them, but they often do. And if you have questions about your paper, the submission process, feel free to contact the associate editor and get it clarified. This is a website that will answer any questions that you might have about publications that otherwise we don't answer here. This is the end of my talk. I'm going to introduce next. We're going to wait and take answers at the very end. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. We'll move Subodhine is next. Sue?
Thank you, David. So I'm Subodhine, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Applied Physiology and at the University of Iowa Carver School of Medicine. So I'm going to continue where David stopped and talk about how to craft an effective revision. So you just saw this slide from David also. And so I'm going to talk about what happens here. So your paper has been assigned an associate editor, and they have then solicited either a number of reviewers, usually somewhere between 2 and 3, and then they've made a decision. So in this case, we're going to talk primarily about you've gotten the decision to revise your manuscript and how to draft an effective revision. Because as you remember, as you can see here, so you have the opportunity to revise your manuscript, but when you resubmit it, it will go out for re-review. And so if you don't adequately address the criticisms, it could get rejected at this point. So what we want to talk about is how do you put yourself in a position where you can get your manuscript accepted and then published in an APS journal. So your paper has just been returned for revision, so congratulations. Now what are the next steps to make it successful at getting accepted? First thing you want to do is look at your for clues from the editor or associate editor as to the critical revisions that must be addressed. So when you get your revision, you'll see all the individual reviewers' comments, but many times the editors will put in a paragraph, or the associate editor, highlighting the critical revisions that need to be addressed in order for your paper to be accepted. Next, you want to read the reviews very carefully and closely follow the reviewer's advice. Here, you want to also distinguish between the major and minor criticisms. And in most cases, it's these major criticisms that you need to address in order to get your manuscript accepted. So what are some of the common criticisms given by reviewers? One is that your paper doesn't have a hypothesis. And it may be that you do have a hypothesis, but you didn't clearly describe that hypothesis in your introduction. So you need to clearly state your hypothesis in the introduction and address this. Another is that there's poor experimental design, methods, or statistics. A poor experimental design can often get a paper rejected. So you want to make sure from the beginning that you have adequate numbers of subjects and controls in your study. If it's a question of statistics, then and how you analyzed your data, that's easily addressed, and you should definitely follow the guidelines by the reviewers. Another common criticism is that you have erroneous or unsupported conclusions. Here, it's easy to address these and follow the reviewer's instructions. Fourth, that you have poor quality illustrations and tables. And again, this is an easily addressed criticism, and you should follow the guidelines set by the reviewer, and also look at the guidelines set by the journal. That you may have inappropriate or missing references. Again, the reviewers will often tell you which references they think are missing, and you should add these to your paper. And finally, that your manuscript is disorganized or poor English. Here again, if English is a second language, you should have your paper read by a native English speaker, and have your paper read by somebody outside of your group, to show or to look at the flow of your manuscript and address any of the comments that the reviewers have. So what are the reviewers requesting? This is what you have to figure out. In many cases, it's to provide more background information. So this is usually in the introduction. They feel that you haven't adequately described what has been done previously and set up the reason why your experiment or this study is important. To change the interpretation of the results. Here, the reviewers are often saying that you have overstated your results and that your data doesn't conclusively say what you think it is saying. And in this case, you would need to, they're asking you to modify the conclusions. They may request additional analysis of data. So they're not necessarily requesting more data, but they want a more thorough analysis of your data, or they may be questioning the statistical methods that you used in analyzing your data. In some cases, they may ask for additional data, and these can be critical major revisions, and in some cases may lead to rejection, or the associate editor may give you the chance to add more data. In some cases, it may be that you lack appropriate controls, or you have low power. The number of subjects that are in each of your groups is inadequate to adequately come to address your hypothesis. And finally, you need to correct mistakes. These are usually minor criticisms, and in most cases, the reviewers are identified exactly the misspelling or where there's a sentence that needs to be corrected, and you should make sure to address all these requests. Chris will address some of this also, but there may be comments about the way your data is presented. This is a typical way of presenting data, the bar graph with the standard deviation, but many journals are now requesting a better presentation of the data and the use of these dot whisker plots. And so here, the individual data points are presented with a mean plus or minus standard deviation. So you can actually see the data and the distribution of the data points, and you could make a judgment as to whether you think this is significant or not. So if the author or if the reviewers are requesting that you modify your graphs, you should definitely modify your illustrations. Another criticisms, the reviewers may comment on your methods and the details with which you have put in your methods. And so if you're doing animal experiments, you should look at the arrived guidelines, checklists. You need to put detailed detailed methods about the species you used, especially in the case of rodents. You need to identify the strain of animal used, the sex of the animal, the age, the source, if it's a genetic modification, what's the background, and also housing and diet conditions. The controls you used, you need to state what kind of controls those were. Were they litter mates? Were you purchased? Where did they come from? Give detailed experimental procedures about drug use, doses, anesthesia and analgesia, and methods of euthanasia, and also steps taken to minimize subject bias. So did you randomize your studies, the animals in the different groups? Did you blind the people analyzing the data with respect to the groups? So in responding to the reviewers, first thing, number one advice, do not respond antagonistically. That's only going to irritate the reviewers. And in this regard, you should ask a neutral colleague to read your response. You may not think it's antagonistic, but a neutral colleague might pick up some things that you've put in your letter. You want to sincerely thank the editor and reviewers for helping you to improve your work. And then if you need to complete additional experiments, do those additional experiments. And finally, you want to respond completely to all the comments. So in drafting your letter, so in your response to reviewers, the best practice is to restate or just copy each of the reviewers' comments and then respond to each comment and identify the line number where the changes were made in the revised manuscript. You want to make it easy for the editor or reviewers to track your changes. Two, in the revised manuscript, you want to mark all these changes. So this is often referred to as the red line version, and most journals are asking for a clean copy of the revised manuscript, but also a red line version so they can track all the changes that were made. And finally, you want to respond before the deadline. If you think you need more time, request an extension. All of the associate editors and editor-in-chiefs are going to give you an extension. So the worst thing you could do is miss your deadline. So what are some of the major reasons for why your manuscript might be rejected? One is that it's inappropriate for the journal. So this is generally that it's not a good fit, as David mentioned. And so you want to do your homework, go on the website, read the scope of the journal. And if you have questions, contact the editor-in-chief or an associate editor and ask them if they think that your manuscript is appropriate for that journal. The reviewers might say that your data is just merely confirmatory or incremental, that it doesn't make a significant advance to the field. One suggestion here is avoid the least publishable unit. There's a lot of pressure on publishing a lot of, the total number of papers that you publish. And so people will divide up their data into small, the least publishable unit. This often decreases the impact of your paper. And so my advice is don't do this. If you want to have a paper that's going to have an impact, you want to present the whole story. Your data might may be poorly designed, or your experiment is poorly designed or inconclusive studies. This is a major flaw, and oftentimes this is related to inadequate controls and inadequate sample numbers. And then poorly written. As it states, a great science in an ugly package will be rejected. So you want to pay attention to how the paper is organized, and the figures and tables, and also the English. And so again, have somebody read your paper before you submit it. If you do get a rejection decision, what should you do? So one is don't despair. Another journal may publish your paper. And as David mentioned, the APS journals now have the option of transferring your paper to Physiological reports. Your paper goes to them with the reviewer's comments, and you have the option later to revise the paper according to those reviewers' comments. You may choose to submit it to another journal, but don't just submit the same paper. Look at the peer review comments you've got and the editor's comments and make changes to your paper. So use those reviews to improve your paper before you resubmit it. And also check your cover letter. You don't want to, send the same cover letter. And then finally, check the instructions to the author. So finally, some of these are, David mentioned, what's tips for success in getting your paper accepted. Number one, design a good study. Make sure you have appropriate controls and significant number of animals or people in your study to adequately test your hypothesis. Select your journal, the journal wisely. So check the journal scope and editorial board composition to see if your work fits in that journal. Read the instructions to the authors. Avoid careless mistakes, spelling, grammar, formatting, as David mentioned. Make sure your references are appropriate and accurate. Remember who your reviewers might be. Oftentimes, the reviewers are going to suggest references that they're specific references that you have not referenced appropriately in your paper, and provide detailed methods. So make sure that your data is, that you have appropriate data, details of the data, and the figures. So finally, thank you for your attention. And as David also mentioned, there's a wealth of information at the physiological, the physiology website. And so please go to this page and read the author's instructions. So I am going to stop sharing.
Okay. So next I would like to let everyone know some of the reasons that I think that APS journals are a really great place for early career investigators to make their home base. So my name is Gina Yostin. I'm the editor-in-chief of AJP Regu. I'm also an associate professor of pharmacology and physiology at St. Louis University. Now, up until last year, I was actually an early career investigator myself. So I feel like I can actually give you some really good reasons for why APS journals are a great place for early career investigators to call their home, because I have a very recent memory of what it's like to be an early career investigator and all of the things you need to think about whenever you're writing manuscripts and trying to figure out where to submit your work. I can also tell you from personal experience that the APS is a really fantastic place to grow up as a scientist and to go through your career as a scientist, especially when you're in that early career stage, because one of the major goals of the APS is to support early career investigators. And that dedication to early career investigators, trickles down, well, actually more like gushes down to APS publications. So we as editors actually really want to support you as early career investigators and help you improve your manuscripts and to help your manuscripts be seen by the right people. Now, I've been editor-in-chief of AJP Regu since last July, so right in the middle of the pandemic. I took over as editor-in-chief. But AJP Regu and actually APS journals in general have been my home base personally for a very long time. My very first manuscript that I published as a graduate student was actually in AJP Regu. It's also my most highly cited manuscript so far. And so I've had a lot of experience with APS journals, and I also can tell you from personal experience that it's been a really great place to call home. So when you're an early career investigator and you're trying to figure out where should I be publishing my work? What should I be doing? Should I try for a really high impact journal, or what should I be doing? Well, I think there's several things that you need to keep in mind whenever you're thinking about what's the best place for my work. The first thing is visibility. Where can I publish my work where the right people are going to see it? And we'll talk in a minute about who needs to see your work, which will help guide you to where you should be publishing your work. It's also critical to think about affordability. And I mean more than just money. Yes, money is a definite thing you have to think about as an early career investigator. But it means more than just that. And you have to be conscious of your time and your frustration level as well whenever you're an early career investigator. So there are a lot of things you have to think about in terms of, can I afford to publish in this journal? And lastly, one thing that's a really big benefit of publishing in an APS journal is that these are society-based journals. And again, APS is really dedicated to promoting the careers of early career investigators. And what that means is that our journals are able to provide opportunities for early career investigators in terms of education, in terms of awards, in terms of building a community that you can be a part of to help get your work out there and to help improve your science as you go along. But who needs to see your work? So where should you publish to get those people who need to see your work to actually be able to see it? So again, sometimes people think about, well, I should just be publishing in the highest impact journal that I possibly can. And you know, there are certain benefits to publishing in places like Science or Nature. I'm not a chair, so I don't know what a lot of chairs are looking for whenever they're looking at applications. But I am on study sections, and I am on search committees. And I can tell you that when I'm reviewing someone's CV, I find it much more impressive for someone to be a first or last author on 5 or 6 high quality publications in a society-based journal than maybe 1 or 2 publications as middle author in a high impact journal like Science or Nature. And it's also something to keep in mind is the way in which journals decide what to publish. At APS journals, we are most concerned with publishing great science. That's what our goal is. In bigger journals like Science or Nature, their primary focus is trying to figure out which manuscripts are going to gain the most likes on social media and what's going to be highlighted in the news the most. They're looking for the most newsworthy stories. And for that reason, there's a really high retraction rate in those journals. So there comes with a trade-off. And again, APS journals have readership of the people who need to see your work. So who needs to see your work? You need your potential collaborators and industrial partners to see your work. So people in industry who might be interested in partnering with you to do science with you. And so how do we know that these people from industry are reading APS journals? Well, a pretty good indication of whether or not someone is reading a journal is whether they're publishing in that journal, because we tend to read the journals that we publish in. And so I can tell you, I've actually looked, and there are representatives and scientists from well over 20 of the top companies, drug companies and biotech companies that publish in APS journals and have done so in the last 5 years. So potential industrial partners are very likely reading APS journals, and so they will see your work. Also, potential future employers. So if you're looking for a career in academia, or you're looking to move up in academia and move to a different location, you need the chairs of physiology or pharmacology or cell biology departments to be seeing your work. So they have an idea of what you do. And if you look at the physiology chairs across the United States and across the world, they publish in APS journals, and many of them, if not most, are members of the American Physiological Society. And lastly, it's really important for you as you build up your reputation in science for your work to be noticed by leaders in the field. And what do we mean by leaders in the field? Well, one type of leader in the field are people who are reviewing your grants. And so in particular, people on study sections and those chairs of study sections. And I actually went back and I looked at NIH study sections, and I looked at the chairs of the various study sections that APS members often submit their work to or submit their grants to. And many, if not most, of the chairs of NIH study sections are publishing in APS journals, which likely means that they're also reading APS journals. So all in all, if you publish in APS journals, the people who need to see your work are going to see your work. The second thing that you really need to be thinking about as an early career investigator is affordability. Now, that has lots of meanings, the first of which is just straight money. When you're an early career investigator and you're a new assistant professor at a new university, and you may have your own funding, you might not. You might be depending on your startup package to pay for the publication fees. So you have to think about, can I afford to publish in this journal? Well, I can tell you that you can afford to publish in APS journals. APS journals have a flat publication fee that is less if you're an APS member. It really pays to be an APS member because you get a huge chunk of that publication fee lopped off when you're an APS member. And you don't pay for, we no longer charge for page charges because it's a flat fee, and we don't charge for color anymore. And if you are publishing something that you want to be open access, we have affordable open access fees as well. But again, money isn't the only thing that you have to budget for when you're an early career investigator. There are other things as well, including your time. Because as an early career investigator, you have to be really concerned about how you're dividing up your time to be able to do all the things that you need to do to succeed and to build your career. And so you don't want to be spending an entire day just submitting a manuscript. And that's not the case with APS journals. The submission process is very streamlined, it's straightforward, it's not going to take you all day. And you also, whenever you're trying to publish, you want to publish quickly. You don't want to wait 6 to 12 months to publish your manuscript. Again, our time to first decision at APS journals is consistently very short, in the realm of 20 to 25 days from a lot of the journals. So you're going to be getting that decision on your manuscript so that you can start crafting your revision within usually about a month. So saving you time so you can get your work out there faster so that the people who need to see it can see it faster. But also you have to think about your frustration level. So as an early career investigator, there are lots of things that can really frustrate you, things that you have to deal with, and publishing shouldn't be one of them. And so that's why with APS journals, we have this very streamlined and very easy to navigate submission system. We have knowledgeable editors who find excellent reviewers who help get you a high quality review that isn't going to be, overly, overly dramatic, I will say, as some reviews can get. So it's going to be a very frustration-free process. So can you afford to publish in APS journals? Yeah, you absolutely can. Not only from the perspective of the money that you have to budget, but also your time, your ability to get your work out there quickly, and your frustration level will be low whenever you publish with us. But lastly, one of the things you need to be thinking about as an early career investigator are what are the opportunities for you as an early career investigator whenever you're trying to publish. So if you publish in a non-society journal, the journals are just there to publish your work, to select something that's going to get them a mention in a news article. They're not as concerned with your development in your career as a scientist. That's not the case with APS journals. We care about you and your development and your professional growth. And so there are lots of opportunities through APS journals to help promote your career development. So for instance, many APS journals have training programs on how to be a really good reviewer. AJP RegU has one. called the Early Career Review Training Program, which we take not only senior postdocs, senior graduate students up to assistant professors, and we train them how to provide a really high quality review. So we can train you how to be an excellent reviewer, which will also help you learn how to be a better writer. And many of the journals have these types of programs. I know AJP Renal has this type of program, and I think AJP Heart has one as well. We also have many awards associated with APS journals. So I know AJP Regu has an early career or new investigator review award. Many of the other journals have these awards as well. And these are awards that are based on your submission of a high quality review article. And if you win these awards, not only does it look great on your CV, not only does it get your name out there and enhance your visibility, but also they often come with a cash reward. So for instance, at AJP Regu, we give $1,000 to our new investigator review award winners. And I could use $1,000. Everyone could use $1,000. So there are lots of benefits to publishing in APS journals. You can use the journals to help enhance your training. You can use it to help increase your visibility through getting awards and your notoriety. But lastly, when you publish in APS journals, you can help start to build a community that will help you as you progress through your career. Because when you publish in APS journals, the reviewers will start to get to know you, and the editors are going to start to get to know you, and they'll get to know your work. They'll follow your work more. And then once the editors know you, then they'll ask you to be a reviewer. And when you become a reviewer, that's going to help increase your skills as a writer. Because I would say the number one way to become a good writer is to actually review other people's writing. But not only this, will you be able to develop this community that knows your work through review of your work and your review of others' work, but also APS journals are a gateway to the APS. And being a part of the APS and a part of the APS community who can help you in your career, who is dedicated to helping promote your career as an early career investigator. So I just want to make a couple of extra points before I close. And that's, you may be thinking to yourself, well, what about my area of research? Do you have a place for me? Well, I can tell you that regardless of whether you are a cell physiologist, whether you study the microbiome of the gut, whether you're a cardiovascular physiologist, whether you're a big data person, or maybe you study how physiology education. It doesn't matter your area of research. We have a place for you at APS journals. There is a place for your work. We cover all of the topics, and there is a place for your work at one of our journals. And because we are so broad in our scope, we have the reviewer base to be able to effectively review your work in a provide you with really good, solid feedback that's going to help improve your manuscript. And we'll do it in a way that's going to help you become a better scientist and become a more integrated member of the scientific community. So the very last point that I'd like to make is that, again, I want to bring us back to, as an early career investigator, you need a community, and APS is a great community for you to be in. And so we really want you to engage with us. Now, APS has several ways that you can engage with the society, and with APS Publications. So APS Publications has a Twitter feed. It's a great way to stay up to date with what's going on with all of the journals. Most of the journals also have individual Twitter feeds. So if you have a particular topical journal that you're most interested in publishing with, I highly recommend that you go follow us on Twitter or follow us on Facebook, or and follow us in whatever social media capacity that is most comfortable for you. And I know Kara's going to talk more about social media here in a second, but I just want to reiterate that we want you to engage with us because we want to help promote you as an early career investigator. And so we're always happy to hear from you. And if you ever have any questions or you have ideas or you just want to talk through what some of the issues are in publications or in science in general, let us know. Engage with us on social media or just send us an email. All of the editors of APS journals are always happy to hear from you. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop. And I'm going to let Kara tell us a little bit more about ways to engage with us.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to take the baton that Gina so expertly handed me and talk to you about just that. I'm Kara Hansel-Keehan. I work as for the American Physiological Society as an associate publisher for strategic journal development and also as the executive editor of AJP Heart and Circulatory Physiology. And today I'm going to focus my talk on how authors can engage with APS journals on social media. So I'm going to split my talk into 3 parts. I'm going to time myself so I make sure that we stay on time so we have plenty of room for your questions at the end. And I'm going to talk to you first about how APS journals, where you can find us on social. I'm also going to talk to you about why scientists use social. And then I'm going to break down some ideas and opportunities for social engagement with the APS journals. So first, let's talk about the APS journals on social media. We try to make it as easy as possible to find us on social. So you can go to any of the APS journal homepages and you will see right here in this, in the middle of the homepage, there are links to all of the social media feeds for each and every one of the journals. I gave you my favorite journal, although I love them all equally, as an example, because we have a number of social platforms in which we engage with AJP Heart and Circ on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And you can find all of our links to our feeds right there. Let me take a moment. I'm going to go through these next 2 slides a little bit quickly, and please do feel free to take a screen capture if you'd like. I just want to drill down a little bit on Twitter just to follow up on what Gina mentioned, and that here you will see at the top our main APS Publications Twitter feed. And then a number of the APS journals have their own Twitter feeds, which gives an even deeper dive into that journal's content and enables that journal to really have a unique voice within the community that that journal reaches. And what's more, many of our editors-in-chief have their own Twitter feeds. So in addition to our main APS journals Twitter feed, we have individual journal feeds, and then we have editors who are active on Twitter. And this is just a short list, really, of the many editors. These are editors-in-chief who have their own Twitter handles, but many, many of the APS journal associate editors, consulting editors, editorial board members are on Twitter or on other social media platforms. So there's really no excuse not to find us on your platform of choice. So speaking of that, let's break down scientists on social. So these are the reasons why I think scientists use social media. So I'm going to dig into this just a little bit. I find that it's really a way to establish and refine your personal brand as a scientist, to share and provide context for your research, clearly to increase public understanding of science, and then of course, hopefully, to potentially increase the citation of your work, eh, and almost no-brainers to connect with colleagues, grow your following, and engage your audience. And I gave you an example here, a little example of a tweet that I found just particularly fun, and it's relevant today because it is Friday, the end of the week. This was a great tweet. I thought just summarized, a way to do all these things that I'm mentioning. Great way to end the work week with a co-authored, pubbed post posted at AJP Heart Sir. Congrats to my friend, and the author gets tagged, his co-author gets tagged on the first authorship with a fun little emoji, and then a link to the article and the title of the article. So thank you. Shout out to Dr. Austin Robinson for his tweet. So let's break down a little bit what I think are the elements of a great scientist's social profile. So you need a great headshot. And here I'm giving you two examples, one on the right here on Twitter, and on the left down below just a bit on Instagram. You need a professional handle name. You need some descriptive profile language, which is meant to identify your authentic and hopefully well-defined point of view. And then we need some consistent content. So put a pin in that last bullet there for a moment until we get to some slides about content. But just to break it down a little bit, I think that these two researchers have really put it all together, right? So there's a great headshot, there's a professional handle name. Now, you might take issue with me that laugh in the lab is not professional, but in fact it is, because Lindsay Avery Fitzsimons, those are her initials, LAF. She goes by that nickname, but also it goes to her point of view, which is to be upbeat, to be a little science tangential fun. And so the whole thing kind of fits together with this authentic brand that she's put forth on Instagram. And then Junie Warrington has some great descriptive language. You know exactly who she is, where she works, what she's doing, and what she's interested in, her expertise, hashtagged beautifully, and she identifies that the tweets are her own, which is an important point, I think. So you've created your profile on your platform of choice. And now let's move in a little bit further, right? So I think that engaging from a solid social media foundation can be broken down into two parts. And I think the first part really is that purpose drives your platform of choice. So if you have truly lecture-worthy images, if microscopy is your thing, if you are doing a lot of confocal microscopy, if you are doing a lot of histology, then maybe you want to think about Instagram. If you are much more interested, however, in a fast-paced conversational community, maybe you don't have a lot of image-heavy work, I think you should consider Twitter. If, however, and although someone might say that Facebook is for old people, if you have a lot of lab events, if you're doing a lot of work with images, but you're also posting videos of a little bit longer content that might be hostable on Twitter, you might want to consider Facebook. And then I think the second part of coming from a solid social foundation really is that frequency equals followers. And I think there are three main points to this I'd like to drive home. One is that consistency is key and really necessary in order to build a following of your social profile. That means that you need to decide on your frequency of posting and then stick to it. So if you feel you can reasonably post once a day, do that once a day. Do it once a day for 6 months and then look back and see what the impact has been. All of the social media platforms have their own built-in analytics, so you can really see you started from nothing, you've paused here, what has been the growth. Of course, you want to build in a little flexibility, right? So EB week, maybe you're just going crazy on Twitter. You're liking, you're retweeting, you're all over Twitter on live tweeting with this meeting. But maybe next week, you need to take a breather. Okay. But so build in some flexibility and pivot as needed. And when I say pivot, I also mean that if in 6 months you find that you really wanted to go all in on science Twitter, but the pace of it is just too fast, then maybe you want to pivot to Instagram or Facebook. So build yourself in some flexibility. So we talked about your profile. We talked about a solid foundation. Now let's talk about what you're going to post there. So you've got to craft a post, right? You have to say something. How to do that. I have given you a couple of examples here. I prefer styling a social media post like a figure caption or a newspaper headline. So that's really the style I go for and the one I recommend to others. I also want you to think about tagging people, tagging journals, tagging the society if it's a society related post. So you can, and then I'll walk through these examples in a second. I also want you to consider leveraging some punctuation. Think about those figure captions, right? Use the equal sign here. It's, I haven't used it by accident. Use your colon, use your comma instead of using the word and. Think a little bit more short version, newspaper headline, use a key punctuation as needed. That will give you a bit more space to work with. And then something I try to live by is that I like to quote tweet more than I retweet. So I think this is quite important, especially to build your following. If you are going to retweet, think to yourself, what am I trying to say about this? And then go ahead and say that. So quote tweet, you can add a sentiment of your own. And so you're sharing something with content from you to explain why you're sharing it. I think that's critically important. Otherwise, someone might see that you've retweeted something, but have no idea why you've done so. So then I also feel that you should consider the visual. So we eat with our eyes, we consume social media with our eyes. And that means that we want to consider what the visual component is. Now, clearly not every tweet, not every Facebook post has a visual component. Obviously, Instagram is always visual component. So there's that to keep in mind. But we want to think about using, what do we have on hand? Images from your own work, maybe some icons, maybe a screenshot. I like the snip and sketch tool. It allows you to draw exactly what you want from the screen and include that. I try my level best to, and I advise others to consider the visual as much as the text. And as you can see here, we have a little icon that tells you right away that this is a podcast before you even read the text of that post on Instagram. And then also we have a little usage of fun emojis. I need to get a new headset. So there you have it. Some nice punctuation, some nice visual in the form of an emoji rather than an image from your work or an icon. And then up at the top, sorry, I should mention that I just thought this was a fantastic tweet because it has all the elements, right? Styled like a headline, it is tagging the right people, and it's offering a little witty content. So thank you to Camilla Wenceslaw and Erica Borman for their great tweets. So this slide, if you maybe take away nothing else, screen capture this slide because I think it encapsulates a lot. Best practices. Let's follow the 80-20 model, 80% original content and 20% retweets. You want to check your notifications daily. You want to like and retweet as a rapid response, not many days later. You want to consider live tweeting a virtual conference. Make sure you're using the right hashtag. It's not hashtag EB, it's hashtag XBio. These are things that are important. If you have a lot to say, let's thread the long tweet instead of having it all in one text, break it up into bite-sized chunks. And then two of the most important things, before you follow a feed, ensure that the content aligns with your goals. And then before you use a hashtag, really search it up, as the cool kids say, on your social platform of choice. And to illustrate this point, I've given you a little tweet here, which shows you that if you're interested in using myocardial infarction's often used abbreviation, MI, as your hashtag, you would be surprised to find that this is related to the Mumbai Indians, which is a very popular cricket team. So you might get a lot of cricket followers who are interested in your tweet, but if that's not the audience you're going for, you want to search that hashtag before you use it. The third and final part of my talk is related to ideas and opportunities for engagement, and specifically with APS and APS journals. So I've broken this into 3 parts. Content created by you and your lab. Here are ways, I think, so we've talked about creating your profile. We've talked about how you actually craft a post on your platform of choice. And now we're going to talk what you're going to talk about, right? What's this content that you're going to put out there? So I would use as inspiration published articles that you have published, that your lab has published, graphical abstracts that are contained in those beautiful articles that you've published. If there's a video abstract that you've done to accompany your article. Certainly, if you've participated in a podcast, if someone in your group has participated in a podcast, post about that. If you've purchased a spotlight cover, please do share that on your platform of choice. It's just meant for sharing. If there's a press release about your work, or if you've participated in a webinar, all good sources of content for social media. And now, once you've exhausted that, you might be thinking like, I need more, right? Okay, so let's look at the journals that you like to read. Obviously, they're APS journals. So look at articles that you would recommend others reading, images that you think are particularly fantastic that you want to share in the APS journals that you're reading. You could share about calls for papers that you are maybe interested in submitting yourself, maybe you're recommending to colleagues. Also, article collections. APS journals have numerous article collections. Some of them are related to calls for papers. Some of them are custom collections. And clearly podcasts that you've listened to that you want to share that you think are just fantastic and like these must listen podcasts, share that. Society news that you want to share. I think APS as a society just has so much content that's available for sharing with members, with non-members. Maybe this is a reason for your colleagues to become members because you're recommending a conference or an award. Hey, deadline coming up. Don't forget to, apply for this award. Member initiatives, webinars, press releases. I mean, there's any number of things. Ebooks and I Spy Physiology. I listed my top favorites, but we could go on and on. And then I'm going to give you some ideas for next level engagement, and then I'll wrap it up. So I think as a published author, you could reach out to the journal and offer to be interviewed for a podcast if that's your jam. If you're thinking, I might like to discuss my work in a podcast format, does that journal have a podcast series? Maybe offer up yourself as an interview subject. You could ask the journal if you are interested yourself in hosting a Meet the Author Twitter chat. You could reach out to the journal if it's active on Twitter and suggest, you know what, I would love to participate in something like that. Journals are always looking for author engagement. And as well, I think it's really a nice value added if you are able to provide social media ready graphics for the journal to easily promote your work. It's just makes everything super easy, especially if you have that queued up for yourself. If you're a podcast listener, I would comment on a podcast. I would also suggest that you reach out to the journal and offer to either host or participate in a podcast if that journal does podcasts. And then, of course, you can amplify the podcast that you're listening to or that you participated in on your social platform. And then if you fancy yourself a science communicator, you could tag SciComm, which is a friendly bot on Twitter that retweets science. Also SciArt if you're on Instagram. And then finally, you might want to consider reaching out to the journal if you are just social media savvy and you want to grow your social media role, you could ask your journal or journals of choice if there's a particular role open for a social media editor. So to summarize and wrap it up here, my social media goals for you would be to set your goal and goals plural and determine what do you want your social presence to achieve. Pick a platform that you really like, that you understand how it works and that you can keep up with. And then create the personal professional profile that clearly identifies who you are. We walked through the steps on how to do that. We talked about making a content plan before you get started and what to do if you get lost and need to make a change. But if you have a content plan and you know what content you want to be posting about, you then go forward and then look back at a certain point, maybe at the 6-month mark, and measure your results against your goals. Adjust as needed, and in the end, really just have fun and engage with your community. Thank you so much. And I'll take the questions in the chat at the end.
Okay. Let's see. Hi, hopefully everyone can see my slides. So last speaker of the day, talking about a topic that could be hours long discussion. So what I'm gonna do is make this 10 minutes. So we'll have fun with it. Rigor and reproducibility. So it's a topic that has come up a lot over the last 5 years. And really it stems from issue that we call the replication crisis. So about a decade ago, there was a lot of news media and attention that started coming around. Hey, we have experiments that people cannot replicate in the labs. And you also had labs who were trying to replicate their experiments from years prior. And it's like, hey, we're having issues with this. So what's going on? So from the NIH, a really important thing that they put out document stated that the two cornerstones of science advancement are really rigor, which is the designing and performing your scientific research, and also the ability to reproduce those findings. So two critical things. And there's been a lot of work on how to improve these. And with that, APS has also been looking at, well, how can we help our authors improve their rigor and reproducibility of the work that they're publishing with us in our journals? So there's a lot of benefits that come to reporting findings that are rigorous and reproducible. And I just want to list 4 of these here to give you an idea of what research has shown. And that includes that when you follow enhanced R&R principles, so rigor and reproducibility principles, you're more likely to be accepted for publication. So you have that material that's in the manuscript that reviewers already want to see. They may be requesting it later. So if you already have it there, normally those manuscripts fly through because people understand, oh, this is what they did. If I don't understand the results, I go back to the methods. I say, oh, this makes sense now. Also, there's a decreased risk of corrections and retractions for these articles that follow the R&R principles we've seen. Another thing is that many funders are now requiring that authors adhere to some R&R principles, some rigor and reproducibility principles. And many of these updated guidelines have been released in the last 5 years or so. And I encourage you, if you haven't seen those, to take a look by just a quick Google search, reproducibility and rigor in NIH, and it'll pull up everything on there, but you can do it for any of the funders. And it's really interesting to see how the requirements are changing for many of our both international and domestic funders. So also manuscripts that follow these principles are actually more likely to be cited. And that's a huge thing that we all want to see. We all want to see, especially at APS, we want to see our authors getting cited out there in the community by other journals everywhere, because of course that benefits everyone. And that's something that we hold deep. So with that, one thing that we've been looking at is a checklist to help our authors. We started this process over a year ago, and we've been going back with all of our editors, with our committees, and really developing and creating a checklist that really encompasses everything related to rigor and reproducibility that would ensure that when your article follows these guidelines or follows this checklist, that your paper would be reproducible to the community and there wouldn't be any issues. So with that, I don't have time to cover everything today in this checklist, but I'm going to go through the first four things, which would be something like animal experiments, the human study part, using cell lines, and also using antibodies. These four topics are really huge. Beyond this, though, the checklist covers other things such as reagents and unique materials. Whenever using microscopy, whether it's confocal, inverted, any type, it also goes through that. A lot of research today has computer simulations and computer programming. There's parts of the checklist about that as well. I know that Sue showed a couple of graphs earlier, and there is a part of the checklist that goes over that and talks a little bit more about what she discussed earlier. Beyond that, we have digital data and figure legends. So all this plays a role in this checklist. So whenever we look at animal experiments, what are we actually looking for and what's in the checklist? So we're looking for the animal use protocol. So it's saying that, hey, this was submitted to and approved by an institutional committee. Oftentimes you'll find this at the first part in the paragraph. And whether a license was needed. And you'll have usually a number that comes after this, and that's coming from your institution. Also, though, we're looking for experimental details, whether this is what type of anesthesia was used, the method of euthanasia. Um, Beyond that, the steps to minimize any type of subjective bias in the study design, the types of animals used in the study. I believe that also goes back to Sue's presentation where she talked about the RIDE guidelines and following those and having all that information in there. And then also describe the controls used in the study, whether it's litter mate, purchase, things like that. And with that, I just want to give a quick sample. Um, so whenever we're looking at it over here to our left, I took this and adapted it from a paper that was from AJP Cell. And as you'll see, the authors did a great job at showing the protocol information. So that's in red, I've highlighted it. They also have animal descriptions. They also talk about their specific details like their concentrations, which I've highlighted in blue. They also provided a detailed description of their experiments, which made it very simple to understand who was in each group, how many animals were in each group, things like that. And at the end, they talk about their controls. So this is what we're looking at whenever we're going through a paper and we're saying, hey, you need to have these certain things in it. So this kind of gives you a little bit of an example of what that looks like. So the next thing would be human studies I wanted to talk about. So again, same thing, similar to what we had last time with the approval protocol number and IRB. For clinical trials, you'll have a registration, statement of registration, and oftentimes a date. With this, you'll also want to usually provide a clinical pathological characteristics table that will be in the manuscript, which will often provide information about the sex, gender, age range, and race of participants. And similar to last, looking at steps to minimize subjective bias in the design. So again, just a quick example of what that looks like and kind of what we're talking about. Here's a sample of a human study section from a manuscript that was published in AJP Heart. And on this, you can clearly see that this manuscript was a double-blind, placebo-controlled crossover study. It gives information about the period of the study, the dosing, but also we have the clinical trial number. Followed by that, they say that they followed the principles of the Declaration of Helsinki, and it was approved by the university, and that information is given there, and that all patients provided written informed consent prior to inclusion in this study, which is very important to having your manuscripts. So this is just one paragraph from this section, but it shows out some of the material that we look for in this type. Next, the third one out of the fourth would be cell lines. So for cell lines, we're looking for species, sex, strain, whenever it's hasn't been established. Also, where the cell line was obtained from. Oftentimes, RRIDs are hugely important. And I know we already asked for these, but we're hoping that they'll be provided more often because they allow people to go really directly to that cell line, get all the information they need with a very short click of a button. So also declaration of whether the cell line authentication was performed by and what type of method, whether it's like STR or other methods that could be used. So similar to the other situations, here's another example. So the breast adenocarcinoma cell line, SKBR3, and then it provides you the catalog number in the RRID. So anybody who goes to this, they can see that, hey, this is the exact cell line that they use. There's already information about the cell line that's out there. Of course, as we all know, this is a pretty common cell line that researchers use and many laboratories worldwide, thousands upon thousands of labs. So it's still really important to have this information because it makes it simple for people to be able to look up, and it also ensures reproducibility later on. So if they're using a similar cell line. So it was derived from the metastatic breast tissue of a 43-year-old female Caucasian. So the detail description is provided there. Also, they give details about the culture method, where it was grown in. Of course, these are normal details provided. And then lastly, it talks about the cell line authentication. So cell line was authenticated using STR within the last 3 years, and all experiments were performed with mycoplasma-free cells. So this is a good looking paragraph that I actually constructed myself for this situation to give a really good example of what we look for in this and what the checklist is looking for. So just as a last example, antibody validations, a lot of research uses antibodies these days. There's millions upon millions of them. So again, RRIDs are an excellent way to be able to show which antibody you're using. A lot of the antibodies target the exact same thing. So having an idea of the RRID does provides an excellent resource for people to find that antibody in the literature and on the company websites. So here's one more example, and you'll be able to tell that I have in this situation the antibody number from the AppCam, so the actual provider, but we also have the RRID that's connected to that. So if a person looked this up, it would take them directly to this antibody on the manufacturer website. Also, you have the dilutions in here. You have who it was made, so Thermo Fisher and AppCam for these examples. So that kind of gives you an example of what the new APS rigor and reproducibility checklist will be looking for. So this checklist, as I talked about, it has been in development for a while. I'm really happy to report that we're going to be releasing that very, very soon in the upcoming months. To all of our community. And we're really going to have a couple of webinars and events to help our authors understand the checklist even more, get a better understanding of it. And then there will be some other things coming along with that. So we're actually going to be releasing the APS rigor and reproducibility program at APS, which will actually provide an opportunity for our reviewers to tell us a little bit more about the rigor and reproducibility of manuscripts they're reviewing. And we'll also be checking for these items in the checklist in the manuscripts using an AI tool in the help of our reviewers. So we're really excited, and we believe this is going to make a huge impact on the research being published in APS journals. And it's going to help our authors, again, get more citations and their work just be well known throughout the entire community. So we're very excited about that. And it will be coming next quarter. So be on the lookout for that a little later this summer. And lastly, if you have any questions, always feel free to reach out to me. I've put my email there. And with that, just had a little picture of the checklist as a Word document. And if you have any questions, always feel free to reach out. Thank you so much. With that, I'll hand it back over to David.
Thank you very much, everybody. Great discussion, great presentations. We have a number of questions, and as people are thinking of more questions, we'll just start at the bottom and work up. Katie Hollis asked if what journals really feel about submitting papers to preprint servers, which is submitting a paper online for others to look at before you actually send it to a journal for publication. And the physical sciences have been doing this for years and years, but not the medical science groups. I'd say up until 4 years ago, we were opposed to it because we considered it already published once it's on the preprint server. But through neurophysiology, we started testing it out, and it worked pretty well. And now I think all of our journals will allow you to submit something to a preprint server before you submit it to AJP. So that's not an issue. I think somebody already responded to that.
That was me.
Oh, thank you.
Sure
And
thing.
Jill Bradford asked, is there a web link for expressing interest in applying for the early career reviewer training program? I think each journal does this themselves differently. So I think you need to contact the individual journal. Gina, do you do this now?
Yes, we do this. So our reviewer, so each journal has a training program that's a little bit different. So ours involves a training session that we try to offer twice per year. So the best way to keep up is to, when these trainings are going to happen, is really to follow us on Twitter and to follow like AJP Heart and AJP Renal on Twitter, because we all announce when these training programs are going to happen, when the selections are occurring and everything. So then once those training sessions are open, then there will be a link for registration and that kind of thing. So I highly recommend following us on Twitter. AJP Regu is going to have one probably in May or June. We're going to open it back up, but the date hasn't been set yet. So follow us on Twitter and you'll be able to find that link.
Do you ever use any old school methods like email to notify people, things like that?
That's funny that you should say that, David. I was just going to add that I think in between those times, right? So to reach out to your journal of choice, all of the APS journals offer support for early career peer reviewers, whether it's formal training or not. So I would, if you're whatever journal you are specifically interested in reviewing for, while we have a communal reviewer database of many people, each journal utilizes different reviewers in different specialties. So you want to be sure that you contact the journal and we will help you ensure that you have a profile built in our manuscript tracking system, that we have your correct contact information, that we have your expertise terms, and that we connect you with the right editors who can then seek you out as a peer reviewer. So contact the journal, email's fine.
All right, next question is, thank you. Carrie Kirkpatrick asked, so I see my article as a colorful alt metric icon. What does that mean and how does that benefit me as an author? Kara, I'm going to ask you to take a look.
Sure, that is an excellent question, Carrie. The colorful altmetric badge is a mark of how much attention your article has gotten online. And this is by news sources. So it's a alternative, hence the name, to a traditional citation metric. So the kinds of attention that feeds into the altmetric score would be mentions in blogs, social media mentions, and that encompasses mostly Twitter and Facebook, readers on Mendeley, certainly news outlets, and they're all weighted accordingly, which is why it gets colorful, because if you have a press release because your research was published in Journal of Applied Physiology and it gets picked up by the New York Times science writer, congrats again, Sue, on having more coverage in NYT this week, then that gets read. And so the more colorful, the better. And so news media, just traditional news media, is weighted higher than one tweet from me, for example, and then it feeds into the altmetric score. And you can learn more about it if you hover over the little badge, and then you can dig into it by clicking on the badge. It opens up a whole nother tab with all the details. You can really go down a whole altmetric rabbit hole if you want.
So Kara, isn't it true? Does the altmetric score also include downloads? Is that?
It does not. That is
Oh,
a
it
separate
doesn't. Okay.
metric. Yeah,
All right.
so downloads of would that is calculated or displayed rather on the
Right.
article level, just below the alt metric score. But the alt metric is really, let's think about it as attention that's been paid to your article.
Thank you. Next one, Junie Warrington asks, how do you deal with reviewers who comment, criticize the lack of reproduced results in studies with clear rigor? We need reviewers to understand that not all published and established findings are reproduced. I don't know, Sue, do you want to give her some advice on that?
So I'm not quite sure. So reviewers commenting that their data has not been reproduced, or the question?
Yeah, it says lack of reproduced results with clear rigor. We need reviewers to understand not all published and established findings are reproduced. They should be trained not to be biased against expecting specific findings, but judge the rigor of the manuscript being assessed. Yeah, I guess one, go ahead.
I guess, yeah, I mean, I don't know if you're commenting on, I mean, there is the reviewer bias or I shouldn't, that challenging dogma, if there is a certain dogma out there in the field, is often difficult. And so producing either negative results and or challenging what's currently seen as dogma, and so reviewers not being biased against that. Other than that, I mean, I think in responding to reviewers, you don't always have to agree with them, and if you don't, you should state it, and present the reason, a rationale for why you think this is false without becoming antagonistic. I mean, I know that's hard sometimes, but yeah, and sometimes there are data out in the literature that are not reproducible, and if people are seeing that as the what the standard or the dogma is at the time, and you produce data that's contra to that, it's oftentimes difficult to get your results acknowledged. So I think you just have to design the best studies possible and present as much data as you can to show that your data refutes what's out there. I don't know if others have comments on that.
If you feel that the reviewer is being unfair or biased, I would talk with the associate editor about that and explain why, and maybe something could be worked out from that end.
Yeah.
Okay, next one I think is maybe for Chris, from Donald Shaw, regarding rigor and reproducibility. How long do I have to save my research data notebooks before I can throw them away, or can I ever do that?
Yes.
Human studies, etc.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it depends on the funding agency and the entity that you're associated with. So I believe, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but 7 to 10 years right now for the NIH.
I think that's...
Yeah, so it depends on that, but it's a great question, and I would look up that information from your exact funding agency.
Jeremy Liu asks, how do you tactfully address a point with the reviewer made that was a result of them misunderstanding or improperly reading the paper?
I mean, I think you, like you just you tactfully try to, you may say, I apologize if if the description was confusing, this is what we meant. You might say, we've revised that section so it's not confusing, and to try to not and say, you just totally misinterpreted, but we apologize for maybe being not as clear as possible, and we've tried to clear that up, and this is what we meant. And so one, address the specific reviewer in your responses, and if it appears that that the comment or what you've written could be misinterpreted, then try to address that by revising those sentences or whatever.
And even as Sue mentioned before as well, having somebody not familiar with your work read your response and say, yeah, that is a nice way of saying it, or that makes more sense to me,
Yeah.
might be helpful too.
And it may also be helpful to have somebody else read the section that this reviewer thinks is confusing and see if they think it's confusing, because you may think that you've stated it perfectly clearly.
I don't see any other questions. I think we only have about a minute left. So at this point, if there are any others, hit enter soon. All right, well, I want to thank the speakers and the audience for participating, and look forward to seeing everybody making AJP their home base for publishing.
Thank you
so
so
much.
much.
Sure. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.